I'm Mike Mangelson. I'm the Principal Counsel and Director for the China Group here at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. On behalf of U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, I'd like to welcome everyone to our monthly webinar series. Today we're going to be talking about e-commerce and protecting IP on e-commerce. I'll just note that today is part one of a two-part series that will focus today on working with e-commerce platforms to enforce your IP and combat counterfeiters. We'll have part two of our program on December 2nd, and that particular program will focus on offline enforcement strategies when doing e-commerce business in China. That includes administrative, judicial, and criminal enforcement. So just to note that today's event will be recorded. And I think there was a slide before the event started that showed the email address askchinaip@uspto.gov. I encourage all participants, all those listening in, to ask questions to that email box and start early so that you will have an opportunity to have your questions answered during this session. I should just note that if your questions aren't answered during the session, that we will follow up with you in an email and try to make sure that we get your questions answered. I also just like to take a moment to introduce our speakers. First off, let me introduce my colleague David Foley, who is in our China team. He's an attorney advisor on both the enforcement and China IP teams at the Office of Policy and International Affairs at PTO. Prior to joining the USPTO, David served as lead counsel in numerous IP disputes as a trial attorney in the Civil Division of the U.S. Department of Justice and was detailed to the Executive Office of the President for 2 years as a senior policy advisor and deputy in the Office of Trade and Manufacturing Policy. We also are pleased to have 3 outside speakers and experts with us today. And I will first introduce Anna Dalaval. She is the Director for Global Brand Relations at Amazon, where she leads a global team in advancing Amazon's brand protection program. Prior to joining Amazon, Anna served as VP and Global Head of Intellectual Property at Ralph Lauren. We also have Daniel Doherty. He is the Senior Director for Global IP Enforcement at Alibaba Group. Prior to joining Alibaba, Daniel was the former General Counsel of Monster Inc. We also have a practitioner, Jason Yao. He is a partner at Wanhui Intellectual Property and is also a member of the firm's management committee. He is also the managing partner of the firm's Shenzhen and Hong Kong offices. Prior to joining Wanhui, Jason was the legal counsel for Procter & Gamble and also the lead Asia Pacific counsel for AccuseNet company, which is the world's largest golf product manufacturer. So I want to just take a few moments at the outset here to set the stage for our guest speakers. I want to talk a little bit about the IP challenges that are affecting our U.S. companies who are doing business, e-commerce business in China, focusing a little bit more on brand protection strategies and some best practices generally before our experts begin to give their remarks. Just to note that this program, I believe in looking at the list of the audience, we have over 500 people that are registered for the event from many different companies and practitioners. We just note that our monthly webinar series do focus on providing information on protecting and enforcing IP, in particular for SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises who are doing business in and with China. So with that, I'm going to take over the screen here, share my screen, and start my presentation. I just wanted to start off today by giving some general advice and information as in particular small and medium-sized enterprises doing e-commerce business in China and protecting your intellectual property. First off, I think it's important to understand that the US and Chinese IP legal systems are different. And so that if you, for example, you've registered your trademark in the United States, it will not automatically confer rights in that trademark in China. It's also very important as you go into doing business in or with China that you understand what type of intellectual property that you're going to need to protect in order to meet that business strategy. Today, we're going to focus more on an e-commerce business model. That's most of the intellectual property we're going to be discussing is focused on that strategy. And also do your homework on the differences between the two systems and also the tools that are available for protecting IP, including the tools that are offered by many of the e-commerce platforms, which is the topic that we're going to discuss today. I also want to encourage everyone to develop and implement a holistic IP strategy that doesn't just include protection through registration of trademarks and patents, for example, but also includes a program for monitoring what's going on in China in the marketplaces, for example, online marketplaces, to see how others may be using uh, appropriately or inappropriately your intellectual property, and if necessary, have the ability to investigate those uses of your IP and also enforce that. So it's important, I think, to have this strategy in place at the outset and not just focus on protecting your rights through registration. So let me just talk about the top two challenges that our rights holders or companies are facing in China when they do e-commerce business. And really it comes down to brand protection. The first is the obstacle to actually protecting a trademark, to getting the trademark rights that are necessary for you to enforce against, for example, counterfeiters. And the big problem there is with bad faith trademarks. And I think we've had a number of programs in the past that talked about bad faith trademarks. I'm not going to address that in detail today, given the limited time. But I should note that that's one of the most important things that a company, regardless of what type of product or service you're selling into China, nearly all the companies that we work with, hundreds of companies have all faced, even if they're a technology company or a consumer products company, they face problems with bad faith trademarks or squatters that have already preempted their ability to trademark or protect their trademark through a registration. And then the other issue that we're going to be focusing on today is the widespread counterfeiting and piracy. And in that regard, first off, let me just, I think it's so important to emphasize what we need, some best practices on trademarks, because the primary tool that you will be using in enforcing on e-commerce platforms is trademark rights. Now, there are opportunities, and we'll talk a little bit later about how you should develop a basket full of rights in case that some right, for example, a trademark right is weak in China. But the bottom line is it's important. This is probably the most important thing and a priority in terms of, allocating resources to develop and protect IP. Trademark leads that list if you're doing e-commerce business. So make sure that you file early. Again, China is a first to file system, and that's one of the strict adherence to that first to file system is one of the reasons why we have the bad faith trademark issue where you have squatters that are registering marks before you have an opportunity to do that. Also file often. That seems a little bit strange to say you have to file your trademark often. And by that, we mean to make sure that you are filing into other classes of goods and services that you may not have considered before, because the squatters also like to identify those and come in and register in those classes, which will give them some rights. If you file, for example, a notice in an e-commerce platform, many times they will use that registration as in a counter notice to claim that they also have rights to avoid being taken down from a platform. Also file a Chinese version of your mark. And you can also consider using the Madrid Protocol to file in to China. It's the quickest and most efficient and less expensive way, but there are some issues that you need to consider, very important issues. And so I highly advise that you work with local counsel, IP counsel, as you go over these issues. And then make sure that you also file and register those trademark rights in your own name. Now let's just go on to counterfeiting for a moment and introduce this topic, set the stage for counterfeiting. This is one of those areas, in particular with China, as we see that them taking many steps, many measures over the course of the last year and a half, over 70 new pieces of legislation to try to address weaknesses in intellectual property protections and enforcement. This is one of those areas where we actually see an increase globally in that problem. The problem of counterfeiting worldwide. It's estimated that by next year, the economic value of counterfeit products will exceed $2 trillion and displace over 5 million workers. So it's a problem. It's a growing problem. As you see from the United States last year, in terms of confiscated counterfeits at the border, 83% of all seizures came from China, Hong Kong. Hong Kong, mostly those are products that manufactured in China but are transshipped through Hong Kong. And over the course of the last 10 years, that number has ranged between 80 and 90%. And those statistics are very similar if you take a look at the source of worldwide counterfeit products that are being traded around the world. As you take a look at certain industry sectors and product sectors, this is also important as you develop a strategy to take a look at how problematic this is for your particular product that you're seeing. You see globally that the share of global cross-border trade in counterfeits, for example, with footwear, is 22% of all products being sold internationally. And if you take a look at those numbers in China, they are higher than the global range. For example, if you take a look at wine, over 50% of wine that retails for more than $35 in China is counterfeit. So what's the reasons behind the growth in counterfeiting over the years? You know, we have the traditional reasons of lax IP enforcement, corruption, and the growth of free trade zones around the world where a lot of IP or counterfeits are traded. But I think also it's important for our discussion today to talk about how the infringers are becoming very adept at finding new methods and technologies to counter enforcement efforts. This includes the evolution of online markets. And you may have noticed how the counterfeiting problem has started to shift, for example, from e-commerce, strictly e-commerce platforms to the privacy of social commerce like WeChat, and live streaming platforms where the products are being advertised and information is provided to consumers on how to acquire those products. We also see that infringers are shipping goods as a result of this evolution of online markets. They're shipping goods in small parcels, which makes it also much more difficult to detect. In China, the infringers understands how the criminal system works and how traditionally there's been criminal thresholds. While we've tried to work to get those removed, they realize that if they warehouse minimal inventories, there's less a chance that they will be criminally prosecuted. And then they're also doing things like not advertising products without a label, or sending products overseas without a label, and then affixing those labels, those counterfeit labels, to the products while they send the product to the consumer. Let me just make a couple observations about e-commerce, but before I finish up and turn the time over to our guest speakers. We know that the e-commerce market in China is very large and it's growing. I think it's important to note also that during the pandemic, we've seen an explosion of e-commerce from around the world, which has been beneficial as it's been more difficult at times to get access through traditional channels of trade. This is the same for China. In particular, if you take a look at what's happening in southern China, which is really the center of manufacturing for China and the world. If you take a look at Guangdong, Fujian provinces, many of the small manufacturers that fed into the global production of products and seller products around the world were impacted by the pandemic and started to look to international e-commerce platforms to sell directly to consumers around the world. And so this is part of this evolution that we've been talking about. I think it's also important as we go into this discussion to understand that each platform that you may be considering to sell on has a unique business model, and that their IP enforcement policies, including the notice and takedown procedures that they have, are different. And also understand and appreciate, I think, if you are a small and medium-sized enterprise, that you may not have the attention that a global brand may get in a platform. And so it's important to find out what's the best way that you can approach that issue to get attention and get effective results working with the platforms. And fortunately, we have the platforms here today that can help give you some of that advice. I'll just mention briefly, excuse me, that China has been, over the course of the last year, taking a number of steps legislatively to address with how companies can enforce their rights on e-commerce platforms. These are some of the measures that have been adopted or soon to be adopted. Most recently, the e-commerce law that was introduced, a draft was introduced a couple months ago. We've commented on those. I should just mention, this is another thing that our team at USPTO does, is we analyze these new measures that come out, and then we provide comments on behalf of the U.S. government. This is an important thing I think that we can do, and in particular work with rights holders. We have meetings with rights holders to understand their concerns about these provisions, and work with China to make sure that these provisions are and these measures are effective in improving the system there. I'll just make a final comment on just 4 best practices, and I think these are very important. I mentioned earlier that it's important not to just rely on one form of IP. You may find that, for example, your trademark is not available. You can rely on, in that case, potentially, if you have, for example, a logo or a brand that has a logo, has an artistic element to it, you could protect that through copyright. There's also a design patent and other ways that you could potentially protect yourself and use as a basis to take down an infringing store on a platform. Also, plan early for enforcement. I can't overemphasize this, that you need to have that understanding, because it's most likely that you will have to enforce your IP if you're selling into China. And so work with competent China IP counsel that is not just an agent that protects through registering marks, but also has the understanding necessary and the experience to use the full ranges of protections that you are going to need to enforce your rights there. Keeping good records is also very important. And then finally, I want to just mention the importance of looking to government resources, including our China team at US Patent and Trademark Office, our IP attaches. We have 11 US IP lawyers here at headquarters with expertise on China IP. And Dave and I are members of that team. And we also have our 3 offices in China, in Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou, and our IP attaches that head up those offices. We have Duncan Wilson in Beijing, Conrad Wang in Guangzhou, and our newest IP attaché, Julie Schwartz, who is heading out to Shanghai here shortly. And they also have local expertise, locally trained IP lawyers in the office there. Our goal in our team is to help rights holders and help to improve the IP protections enforcement for our rights holders who do business in or with China. And we do that in a number of ways. One is through the outreach that we're holding today, and also through our one-on-one and our group consultations and meetings with rights holders to better understand what type of problems they have, what types of issues they're dealing with. We can have one-on-one consultations. I encourage you, if you have particular issues, to reach out to us to talk about some of those issues. And also, we can, in certain circumstances, and this is also important for practitioners to understand, we can advocate in China on behalf of rights holders. And this is typically a situation where the system is broken down, it's not working properly. Say, for example, local protectionism issue. We can raise that issue with the authorities. We can attend local hearings and court hearings to shine light on that issue, to make sure that things are transparent and that our companies are being treated fairly. I won't go over on, we have on the policy side, we also work with our Chinese counterparts, CNIPA, for example. We recently had a meeting with them and Commissioner Shun. We have programming and with our counterparts there, with the courts. And that's also, I think, an important part of what our team does. I'll just finish with this slide here. This shows our IPR toolkit, the cover page of our IPR toolkit, which is located on our China IP webpage on the uspto.gov site. I encourage you to go there for additional resources. This resource was just recently updated with all of the recent changes that have happened over the last couple of years in China. So that's a good resource. I should also just mention that our webpage, our China IP webpage, is going through a remake, redesign with a much more, with added resources. And so I think you'll find that very valuable. Look forward to that rollout that's going to happen in November. So with that, I'm going to now turn the time over. I'll stop sharing my slides here. And I will turn the time over to Anna for her presentation. We'll just go through the next 3 presentations from our guest speakers and experts, Anna, Dan, and Jason. And following their presentations, David Foley is going to lead a moderated Q&A discussion. So I'll turn the time over to Anna.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you to the USPTO China team for putting together these webinars, to the other panelists and the audience for their interest and participation. My name is Anna Dallaval, and I'm the Director of Global Brand Relations at Amazon. And my team partners with brands, industry association, and government stakeholders as well to educate on Amazon brand protection programs. And more importantly, we also gather the necessary feedback that we need to constantly improve. So I'm excited for the opportunity to share here today an update on the Amazon global efforts to protect consumer selling partners and brands from counterfeits. Next slide, please. Let me open, by saying that Amazon really strives to be Earth's most customer-centric company. And we offer a vast selection of products, low prices, and fast delivery. What does that have to do with brand protection? Well, the way we deliver on that vision is by creating a shopping experience that customers, sellers, and brand can trust. Because we know that trust is easy to lose and hard to gain back. And we know that many of Amazon's selling partners are small and medium-sized enterprises, and they represent the majority of the physical products that are actually sold in our store. So we are proud to help those small businesses thrive and create hundreds of thousands of jobs in their local community. But in order to do that successfully, we work hard to protect these customer and selling partners from counterfeits and all other type of abuse that can be found in a store. In 2020, for example, we invested $700 million and dedicated more than 10,000 employees to stopping fraud and abuse. And because of the significant resources that we invested and the efforts and the partnership that we have received from brands, we have been able to provide consumer with a trustworthy shopping experience, where less than 0.01% of the products sold on Amazon last year received a counterfeit complaint from a customer. Next slide, please. But we've heard from Mike that the counterfeit problem is continuing to grow. And so while we are proud of the progress we have made, we will continue to invest and innovate and stay ahead of counterfeiters. So we approach our counterfeiting efforts through 3 strategies. The first is we have built a robust proactive controls to protect customers in our store from receiving a counterfeit product in the first place. Second, we have developed a powerful industry-leading tool, including brand registry, Project Zero, and transparency, for brands to partner with us and ensure that only authentic products are sold in our store. And third, we work with brands and governments around the world to hold counterfeiters accountable by sharing information with law enforcement and support their criminal investigation and prosecution, and by pursuing civil litigation with brands. So I would love to provide a little bit more details about each of the 3 anti-counterfeiting strategies. So next slide, please. Our first objective, as I said, is to ensure that customers and brands never see a listing for an infringing product in our store. But we also want to make it straightforward for honest entrepreneurs and small businesses to open selling accounts while keeping the bad actors out. So we take a proactive and aggressive approach to try and accomplish both. We focus on 2 pillars: sellers vetting and automated brand protection, or ABPs, as we call them here at Amazon. So our team invented and leveraged a combination of computer-based machine learning and expert human review to vet every prospective third-party seller as they attempt to register in our store. In addition to verifying document and machine information against third-party and government's record, we recently introduced 2 innovations in seller vetting. The first is live video verification. We actually had to pivot from in-person verification because of COVID. So this is where we conduct a one-on-one conversation with potential seller to verify their identities in documentation, and it has proven to be a successful method. So it's a high-touch experience that also allows us to help the honest entrepreneurs and small businesses that are trying to sell on Amazon for the first time, while making it even more difficult for fraudsters to hide. Another recent innovation that we developed in the seller vetting space was in response to a risk signal that we identified, where bad actors were actually providing false addresses, or they were seeking to change the address after their registration was completed. So to address this, we launched an address verification system where Amazon sends new and existing seller a postcard to the address they provided. And the postal address of verification code, much like the one that you will receive on your phone this day very often to confirm your identity when you're trying to sign in into different website or your bank account. And seller must report back to Amazon with that ID code within a limited period of time. So a result of the combination of the machine learning, this human expert review, an innovative, even if low-tech solution like the postcard, last year, only 6% of all attempted account registration passed our verification processes, and we're able to list product for sale. Next slide, please. So the second pillar of our preventive strategy is automated brand protection. Amazon is proactively removing any potential suspect listing that we may find in our stores through automated protection that leverage a combination of algorithm, machine learning, heuristic to scan our catalog. And we do that constantly. So our technology analyzes different types of data about the products, the brands, the seller. We analyze text, imagery, other risk signals and pattern, and to surface potential infringement. So you may wonder, what does a suspect listing look like? Well, there can be products listing that incorrectly use trademark terms in their title. Or maybe there are images that use an unauthorized logo. Or sellers shipping product from countries where a certain brand product is not manufactured or distributed. So the bottom line is really that we look at a lot of signal, and there's a lot that goes into this automated brand protection, which are always hard at work in the background to protecting customers and brands. Next slide, please. So our second strategy to protecting customer, brands, and store from counterfeiting and fraud is all about working with brands, because we know the brands know their products best and their intellectual property rights. And so we provide them with tools to protect their brand, and we empower them to identify and remove any counterfeiting listing they see. As Mike said, the basis for any brand protection program is for a brand to register and protect its intellectual property rights globally if possible and needed. So we wanted to help small and medium-sized businesses navigate what can be sometimes a confusing and costly process to protect their name, their logo, their product design, and other aspects of their brand. That's why we designed the IP Accelerator, specifically with medium and small-sized businesses in mind, as a means to make it easier and more cost-effective to protect their IP. This program connects entrepreneurs with a trusted network of IP law firms that provide high-quality trademark registration services at competitive prices. In 2020, IP Accelerator, which started off in the US, expanded to Europe, India, and Japan. And this year, they further expanded to Canada, Mexico, Singapore, Australia, and Brazil. And last year alone, more than 7,000 small and medium-sized businesses used IP Accelerator in the US or in Europe to file trademark application, and receive, therefore, early access to brand registry and the benefits that come with it. Next slide, please. So if we get next slide. Thank you. So once you have a pending or registered trademark, you can access brand registry. And so it can be helpful to think of brand registry as our umbrella program that allows access to powerful tools the brands use to build and protect their business. One of these tools is report a violation. which allows right owners to search Amazon store for potentially infringing products. A rights owner can use keywords, images, or other product identifier for their search. And also brands in brand registry can see the latest status of their reported violation, as well as the notices they have submitted over the last 6 months. Next slide, please. And next slide, so he will cover this as well. Thank you. In addition, we have also Project Zero, which provides brands with the unprecedented ability to directly remove counterfeit product listing from our store in nearly real time. So it's a self-service counterfeit removal tool. You don't have to contact Amazon, but you can just take an infringing product down as a brand owner on your own. So like all of our tools, obviously Project Zero has safeguards in place to ensure that brands are operating with a very high degree of accuracy and not harming honest seller in our store. And finally, if for some reason a brand is not enrolled in brand registry, they can still file a notice using Amazon public notice form. So that ensures that all right owners have access to an efficient notice takedown mechanism. So regardless of which of these three channels a brand uses, report a violation, Project Zero, or the public notice form to report an infringement, I think the important and key part is that Amazon uses the data from those notices of infringement to better train its proactive brand protection tool, those ABPs we spoke about earlier, further reducing the need for brands to file notices going forward. Next slide, please. And next. So brands can also participate in our transparency program. Every unit uses a unique 2D serialization code, and we're able to scan each and every unit for authenticity before it ships to the customer. And we're now working with 15,000 brands and have enabled the protection of more than 500,000 products unit. And we continue to see promising results and hear good feedback from participants. So all these two, brand registry, Project Zero, transparency, are powered by Amazon Advanced Technology, but also really rely on each brand's expert knowledge of their product, because we believe that together we can more effectively detect and stop counterfeit. Next slide, please. And next. Thank you. So finally, our last key area of work is holding bad actors accountable. And so while we put tremendous investment in our proactive measures, we know that bad actors are relentless and will continue to evolve and try to attempt to evade and circumvent our protection. So we don't want to just chase this criminal away from Amazon, but we want to make sure that we stop counterfeiting anywhere. And so about a year ago, Amazon established a new counterfeit crime unit dedicated to bringing to justice this bad actor. And it's a global team made up from former federal prosecution, experienced investigator and data analysts that work hard to disrupt and dismantle this criminal network. And we applaud the law enforcement authority who are already part of this fight, of course. And this team has taken upon themselves to really lead in identifying new and emerging trends that counterfeiters are using to perpetrate their fraud against consumers. They've worked with many different types of brands and right owners, including household names that you've heard like Yeti, Ainsbrand, and GoPro, Italian luxury brands like Maison Valentino and Ferragamo, but also small businesses like JL Childress, which sell like travel products for parents, and Dutch Blitz, a family-owned card game company. So I know that we will be focusing more on offline, online to offline enforcement and cooperation with law enforcement in the second part of this webinar series. So for now, I wanted to thank you again for the opportunity to talk about Amazon brand protection efforts. and I will pass it on to Dan. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. If we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. And I would like to begin by thanking the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, Mike, David, Kelly, the entire team. We really appreciate the opportunity to come, and thank you everyone who has taken the time from their days, their busy schedules to attend. So we hope that we will provide some meaningful information for you, and we'll go ahead and jump into it. Next slide, please. So this is what I refer to informally as our 4 pillars, our approach to IP protection. And you'll see that the first is what I would call reactive, the notice and takedown, where we are receiving a request to remove a listing from the rights holder or the registered agent. And then the second pillar is our proactive efforts. And I'll talk about that as well. Our offline, as Anna mentioned, and Mike mentioned as well, there is the next presentation in this series will focus on offline enforcement. So I won't spend a lot of time on that, but we want to provide a well-rounded overview of our efforts. And then, so we'll talk about that briefly. And then the last is stakeholder collaboration. And so we'll talk about that more broadly, but events exactly like this, where we are given the opportunity to come to you as rights holders or attorneys for rights holders or IP professionals, and to learn more about our policies and practices and how you can work most effectively with us to protect your IP. So the next slide, please. We'll move into notice and takedown. And so I want to draw everyone's attention to, at the top of this slide, you will see ipp.alibabagroup.com. And that is one of the most important URLs. And the IPP, it stands for IP protection. So our IP platform is, it's really a one-stop location where you can, as a rights holder, can go and enforce your IP, across a number of Alibaba platforms. And it is something that we have invested heavily in, particularly in the last few years. We introduced a new platform and have continued to improve that experience. And a couple of things that I want to say, you will see in the blue in the middle, it says the Alibaba IP Right Protection Handbook. And so there are a lot of resources also on this site. So the IP Protection Handbook is literally a step-by-step guide that we have developed to act as a resource for people who are looking to effect takedown requests on our platforms. And you may be able to see in the upper right corner, the IP platform is offered in English and Chinese. And so the handbook itself is actually offered in a number of additional languages. So for example, it is offered in French, Italian, Spanish, German, Korean, Japanese, and of course, English. And that is really a step-by-step guide to how you can use this platform. So this is the platform that a rights holder would go to if they were looking to register an account, and they can register an account, they can put their IP into that account, and then they can use that to enforce on their platforms. We accept the full range of IP. So, patent rights, trademark rights, copyrights, design rights, and for European rights holders, unregistered design rights. I do want to note that you are probably familiar with Alibaba platforms, but I'll take just a quick moment to note that we have domestic, for us, we're a Chinese company. We have domestic facing platforms like Taobao and Tmall, and to enforce IP on those platforms, we do require that it be China-issued IP for enforcement on those platforms. For international platforms, such as Alibaba.com, AliExpress, for those platforms, you can also use the IP that you have registered in Europe and in the United States. So it's important, and this harkens back a little bit to what Mike was saying earlier of being thoughtful about developing that basket of rights and thinking about where you want to do enforcement and making sure that you have the IP that you would like to have for the purposes of that enforcement. And you know, it's a very technology-driven platform. It's very effective. The overwhelming majority of takedown requests are processed within 24 hours, and so it's quite fast and quite efficient. If we can go to the next slide, please. This is just a snapshot of some of the resources that are available. So I mentioned the IP Protection Handbook, which is really a step-by-step guide. You'll see in the middle toward the bottom the IACC Market Safe logo. The IACC is the International Anti-Counterfeiting Coalition, and they are one of the oldest organizations in the United States dedicated to anti-counterfeiting. And we have worked with them for a number of years. And the Market Safe program is something that we're very proud to partner with them on. And it is an IACC initiative, and it is it really is focused on SMEs. And so you know, if you are an SME and you are looking for some assistance in terms of enforcing on Alibaba platforms, you'll see my contact information at the end of this presentation. But feel free to reach out to me. But you also can search IACC Market Safe, and you'll find it on their website. And the IACC actually receives information from the rights holder about infringing listings that they would like to have reported, and then the IACC actually does the operation of reporting those listings, taking care of the submissions, the counter notices, those sorts of things. It is completely free. There's no need to be a member of the IACC, and it's something that Alibaba is proud to be able to provide. It's a valuable resource, and so we provide the resources for the IACC to offer that at no charge. It's a year-long program, and the idea is that by the end of that year, any SME will be familiar and able to effectively you know, do their own takedowns. Above that, you will see that is actually an online form. So I mentioned the IPP platform where you can register an account, where you can upload your IP documents that you want to use for enforcement, and that really is the most sophisticated, most advanced, and the most efficient way to go about that. But we do also have an online form that does not require registration. You also cannot store your documents there, so that's something that you would need to do each time. But for a rights holder, particularly SMEs who may be not familiar with enforcement on our platforms, or who maybe think that they will only do it on occasion, that can be a good option for them as well. And then in the upper left, you'll see the words, "How do I file an IPR infringement complaint?" And if I'm not sure that you can see it, but there's a blue tab. So this is a page from the IPP platform, and I mentioned that there are a lot of good resources. That particular tab is an SME support center. So that's something that we revamped and launched, and it has a lot of really good resources, FAQs, case studies, which are really use cases on how to effectively, you know, what are some of the most common reporting scenarios, how to go about reporting those. There really are a lot of good resources, tutorials. For SMEs, there's also a simplified set of reporting codes to make it easier for them to report and have success in protecting their IP. So I really encourage people to go to ipp.alibabagroup.com, and you will, if you're not familiar with it, and you will see the resources available there. Next slide, please. And we're moving now to some of the proactive measures. And each year, Alibaba proactively removes more listings than all rights holders combined in their takedown requests. And it's something that we invest a lot in terms of human resources, in terms of technology. We have advanced algorithms designed to identify potentially problematic listings and remove those. And you'll see there that the vast majority of those, 96%, are removed before a single sale. And we know it's important for the protection of consumers, for the protection of IP and rights holder brands and other IP. It's important to get those removed and to get those removed quickly. And so so that's something that and given the size of our platforms, it would not be possible really to have that kind of success without using technology. So that's something that we continually invest in. Next slide, please. And I'll talk, as I said, not super long on the offline investigation. There's a separate presentation on this, but I do want to talk about it a little bit. We have an offline investigations team. They are made up of for the most part, former law enforcement themselves. And this team works very closely with PSBs and provinces across China. And having come from law enforcement themselves, they understand, how law enforcement wants to receive information, how they can effectively provide that information to them, and ideally provide them with the most appealing case possible in the hope that they will take that up. Law enforcement around the world, of course, has threshold requirements and resource constraints, and the idea is to make the cases as compelling as possible. And I do think that this team is really some of the unsung heroes. They are investigators by nature, and they will do what they can to try and tie together any sort of upstream related accounts, downstream related accounts, and that they think might be of interest to law enforcement. And these cases are developed really one of three ways: from our own proactive efforts. We sometimes are referring things to law enforcement that we find. Sometimes law enforcement come to us, and they may be working on a separate case, and they find some connection to Alibaba that they make a formal request to us. And then, of course, from the rights holder, the brand owner is initiating a case. It's a case that they are working up. Once they identify a target that they want to pursue, and they're ready to refer it to the PSB, they will often come and talk to our team and let them know that this case is coming, ask them if they could start to do their investigative work. And hopefully that's persuasive to the PSB as well, that they can let them know that Alibaba is aware of it and has begun its efforts to help support. And just a few quick statistics. Last year in 2020, there were over 2,744 investigations that we assisted with. There were nearly 3,000 arrests, 2,927, and nearly 1,500 facilities, manufacturing and distribution facilities that were shut down. And I do get this question sometimes. People feel like, well, Alibaba as an online company, as a technology company, why would why are you so heavily invested in offline cases as well? And the truth is, it's important to get rid of problematic listings. It's important to get bad actors off the site, but these are not virtual goods. These are manufactured products with points of manufacture and distribution, and we feel like we can have the greatest impact if we can help remove those from the stream of commerce. So we're very proud of that work. Next slide, please. I also mentioned stakeholder collaboration. You'll see some of the initiatives there. The Alibaba Anti-Counterfeiting Alliance, the AACA, that is something that has grown to, we are approaching our 5-year anniversary. In January, it will be 5 years. It started as 30 companies. These were companies that we were working with, as I just described, offline investigations, working together on some of the proactive efforts to help make those as effective and efficient as possible. And we felt like we were doing this in somewhat of a siloed way. We were working on these things with individual companies in much the same way, and they had similar interests. And we felt like if we could bring that together, under one umbrella and give the companies a chance to interact, and they can find out what are the synergies where they can work with each other on. Sometimes they may be pursuing the same targets, and it's a chance for them to combine resources. And we thought it was a good idea. We thought it would work well. I think it's been even more successful than we anticipated. That what started as 30 companies has now grown to more than 200 companies and over 700 brands. And we found over time that we needed to sort of move them into rough industry groups so that there was a little more structure and it could be more effective. It was easier when it was a few dozen brands. And so we have different working groups, and we know that the needs or the trends or the challenges that the automotive industry, for example, may find may be different than the luxury industry. And so we try and provide that structure so that they can focus on the things that are of most importance to them. It's a chance for them to work on offline cases, proactive measures. As Mike was saying earlier, there's been a lot of legislation. It's a chance to help understand that, how the laws are changing and the impact of those. And you'll see at the bottom, the SME Advisory Committee. This is something that I've mentioned SMEs a number of times during this presentation. And this is something that is really important to us. SMEs really are the lifeblood of our platforms. And so they are something that is very near to our heart. And, a number of the AACA members are large multinational companies with, personnel on the ground in China. But it was important to us to also have an opportunity for SMEs to bring their voice to the table, and so that they could help us understand, some of the unique challenges that they may have and how we best can support their efforts. And so we have, for the International SME Advisory Committee, we have members from the United States, of course, from Spain, from France, from Germany, Italy, and a number of countries in the UK as well. So we're very proud of that work as well. I mentioned the Market Safe program earlier, and also events like this, of course. And we work with the European Commission. We're a member of the MOU on anti-counterfeiting there, and we work with the observatory, the EU IPO observatory as well. I'm one of the working group experts for intermediaries with the observatory. Next slide, please. And this is, I believe this is my final slide before my contact information. And, we, of course, this is impacted by COVID and the restrictions related to that. But we had done a number of IP protection summits, and we had done them in Madrid, in London, in Rome. And there are many stakeholders, and for us, this is one of the most important opportunities for these stakeholders to come together. And you can see from the logos, often we will have these hosted at universities, and we value the input and the perspective that academia brings to IP and IP protection, as well as law enforcement, policymakers, and other government officials, rights holders, of course, we as the platform. There are many stakeholders, and including consumers. I didn't mention this earlier, but with the AACA, consumer awareness campaigns is something else that we have done, and consumer-focused initiatives. So there really is an effort to try and bring all of the stakeholders together to build a real community for awareness and protection of IP. And next slide, please. I think this is my contact information. And there, I don't know if you can see it well, but it's my name, Dan.Dougherty, DOUGHERTY, at Alibaba-Inc.com. So thank you, and I will turn it over to Jason.
Thank you, Dan. Many thanks for here today. Share with you my experience in dealing with the IP infringement in China. Michael just mentioned, I worked for a few US companies as in-house counsel for 18 years before I moved to private practice 7 years ago. And now I work for an IP law firm helping a lot of clients protecting their IP rights in China. Many of them are medium, small-size enterprise. Hopefully, my sharing will be helpful for the audience today to better understand the situation here in China and form a strategy that's cost-effective and workable. Please go to the next slide. First of all, I will provide you a general assessment on the overall situation based on my first-hand experience in China. And then I will share with you my suggestions on what can be done to tackle online infringement activities. In the end, I'll show you a successful story through a case study on how SMEs can work together with the competitors in the same industry to effectively fight with counterfeiting problem here in China. Here are a few key findings and observations. Please go to the next slide. Here are a few key findings and observations on the overall situation of online infringement issue. First of all, as Mike has mentioned in his presentation, and most of the audience here may have already known, internet has become the major channel for counterfeiters to promote and sell their products. The COVID-19 pandemic has just enhanced and increased the trend. Social media has quickly become a very significant part of life for most of the people around the world. The combination of social media and traditional online shopping platforms has provided a perfect channel for counterfeiters to market and sell products, and to make it extremely hard for brand owners to monitor and trace counterfeit activities online. So it's important to work with online shopping platforms in monitoring and tracking down listings of infringing products. However, as we all know, counterfeiters can always figure out how to relist their products without being detected. So it's equally important to conduct offline investigations on repeat offenders and pursue criminal and civil liabilities against those key players. And finally, I have to be honest with you, we can never expect that we can completely eliminate counterfeit problem from the marketplace, online or offline. We can only control the problem within an acceptable level, even if we work very hard. Okay, enough being said, let's take a look at what we can do to protect our brands in the cyberspace. Please go to the next slide. Okay, first of all, every brand owner should have an online monitoring program. It's hard to imagine that a brand can ignore what's going on the internet. People are often surprised by what they say when they have a search on some platforms. For example, on Pinduoduo in China and a few other platforms, you will be surprised on what we can find on those platforms. Or you can simply Google the internet, Google your brand on the internet. It's safe to say that no brand is immune from the disease of counterfeiting. I believe online monitoring is the basic thing a brand owner should do with their brand protection program. It can be done internally by an in-house team or through outside service providers. I'm sure you know a lot of very professional service providers that they can provide online monitoring for the small and medium-sized companies. And the next step is to work collaboratively with online platforms like Alibaba and Amazon, just like Dan and Anna just introduced, and fully use the complaint and takedown system provided by those major platforms. And these platforms have invested a lot of resources in their intellectual property protection program, just like Dan just mentioned. And brand owners should learn how to leverage those efforts and protect their brands in the most cost-effective way. And every online platform has certain rules, of course, on notice and takedowns. So some of the listings may not be easy to be taken down, because some of the rules of those platforms are not easy to be satisfied, and very often some listings cannot be taken down through the online complaint system. We see more and more brand owners filing civil lawsuits in China against those listings that cannot be taken down through the complaint system. As you may have noticed, courts in China have become more aggressive in giving higher damages, especially in those counterfeiting cases. That's why it makes more sense to file civil lawsuits for injunction orders and monetary damages in China now. And those major platforms like Taobao, JD, and a few other platforms, they have been very cooperative in providing ID information of the sellers before a lawsuit is filed. And after a lawsuit is filed, you can actually apply an order from the court. And the court will be served to the platforms. And the platforms will provide transaction records to the court. So you can find out how many products have been sold and how much profits have been made by the counterfeiters. And then you can claim your damages based on those information. And in most of such cases, the damage awarded to the brand owners at least can pay off the legal expenses. And if you can find a big number of transaction records, the damage can be much bigger and much more than what you have spent for the legal actions. And if we have extra budget, it's always helpful to identify high-profile sellers or repeated offenders for offline investigation and enforcement actions. It will create great deterrence among counterfeiters if some of them can be put in jail. I would encourage you to do at least a few raid actions on an annual basis in China so that you can keep the pressure on those counterfeiters. Of course, if you have more budget, it will always be effective to stop the entire counterfeiting activities in China by tracing back the distribution network and the manufacturers to pursue criminal prosecution against those bad guys. And if you are successful in doing so, the entire counterfeit industry will be shocked and quiet down for a relatively long time. And now I would like to share, please go to the next slide. I would like to share very briefly with you a very successful story from the US Golf Manufacturer Anti-Counterfeiting Working Group. The group was formed by all of the major golf brands in the US, including Acushnet, Titleist, Callaway, Cleveland, Srixon, Pin, PXG, and TaylorMade. The group has a very aggressive online monitoring program and offline investigation strategy. Earlier this year, the group identified one seller on Taobao. They did a test purchase and were able to locate the physical address of the seller. And then they set up surveillance on this seller. In a few weeks, they were able to find out another 5 online sellers that are connected. And then they trace back to the assembling place, the warehouse, and the manufacturer in different cities. And last month, they worked with the Shanghai police and raided more than 10 locations in 5 provinces. And all of the dealers were arrested for criminal prosecution, and over 21,000 counterfeit items were seized, including golf clubs, bags, shoes, and many other products. And those counterfeiters will be criminally prosecuted and put in jail. And you can imagine the deterrence such an operation can create among the counterfeiters. Please go to the next slide. Here are a few takeaways from the story. First of all, just like Dan and Anna mentioned, you should understand the IPR protection policies of different platforms and take full advantage of those tools and programs provided by the platforms. And I would encourage you to work closely with the IP protection teams of those major online platforms like Taobao, Alibaba, and Amazon. I know they have a very big in-house team working on IP protection. And they will be very helpful for you to identify those major dealers on the platforms. And then you can work offline on investigation and enforcement. With such a strategy, I believe you can have a very effective online protection program without spending a lot of money. I noticed that there are a lot of questions have been asked by the audience. So I'd better stop now and leave the time for the audience to ask questions and for the speakers to answer those questions. That's it for me. Thank you.
Jason, thank you so much. And thank you also, Dan and Anna, for your very insightful presentations. Very much appreciate you taking the time today to walk our participants in through the process of notice and takedown, through engagement efforts you've undertaken, and also how they can prioritize their notice and takedown efforts. I'm going to start off with a question that's often on top of a lot of folks' minds in view of the recent pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic has changed the way that a lot of legitimate businesses are conducting business, and has also had a similar impact to illegitimate business as well. So I'm going to start with Anna and Dan. What changes have you seen by counterfeiters in the way they're conducting business in view of COVID-19? Is this going to be just a shift in the types of products offered, or even their business methods? Just love to hear what you're seeing on your side.
Sure, David, thanks for a very good question. Obviously, the pandemic has been, challenging time for everyone, top of mind for everyone, has affected the retail industry. We were very grateful to be able to continue to serve our customers and selling partners and brands during this time. But we certainly saw increased attempts to create account. And so, as I mentioned, one of the changes, for example, we had to make was to pivot from the in-person seller verification to the live video verification, as people couldn't meet anymore. We saw also attempts to create listings specific to the pandemic, misleading face masks for a lot of our brand owners and right owners. I do believe right owners have been adjusting, they've been monitoring these trends and the situation, and they've been sharing these infringing trends with us, which in turn help us really, improve our proactive brand protection. So while definitely the pandemic has attracted bad actors who've been trying to take advantage of honest sellers and brand, despite their attempts, we continue to make strong progress, towards driving counterfeit down.
And I would agree with that. When I say agree with that, I mean with the COVID focus. So obviously we've had an increased focus on COVID related listings, personal protection equipment, and so we have developed advanced algorithms to help detect and remove those listings, and listings where simply making claims of cures or as offering a benefit or something that to our knowledge is not scientifically proven or is not accurate, to remove those listings to protect consumers. And in addition to specific initiatives that we've had with brand owners of personal protection equipment, we have worked closely. We were identified as a strategic partner of Homeland Security, and we received an award from the IPR Center for the COVID-related work that we've done. So it's probably a very good example, actually, of how we as a platform need to always stay on top of current trends and to be as effective as possible, making sure that our resources are targeted in a way that most protects rights holders and consumers.
Thank you both. Jason, would love to hear your thoughts as a practitioner, as a person on the ground. Have you seen changes as a result of COVID-19 pandemic in the way counterfeiters are either marketing their goods, selling their goods, what they're focusing on, and anything that would be helpful for SMEs who are listening today?
Yeah, it's a very obvious trend that most of the counterfeiters move from offline to online. It's usually the situation that if you go to a offline store, for example, the golf shops next to the golf course, you will find a lot of counterfeits there. But now it has changed. Most of the counterfeiters, they move from offline to online. Some of them, they only sell online. So it's very difficult to actually find them out offline. And oftentimes they move from retail shops to a apartment room, and they don't have any inventory. When they get an order from an online buyer, they will send the order to the manufacturer. The manufacturer will ship the products directly from the factory to the buyer. So there's no way you can stop the products in the middle. Unlike before, you can find out counterfeiters by monitoring the retail shops or the wholesale markets. Now that's all gone. It's all gone online.
And would you be able to provide any advice for SMEs on how they can adjust their tactics to attack this new method of counterfeiting, going purely online?
Right. That's why I said it's very important to have an online monitoring program and then identify those high-profile sellers or repeat offenders through the online monitoring program, and then find out the physical locations of those sellers and do offline investigation and enforcement actions.
Jason, that's a great point, and I think that actually leads well into the next question that we have, and that's a question I'm going to start with Dan and Anna again on this one. What information is available to a rights holder once they have successfully had a listing removed? So if they want to go from sort of from platform to platform once they received a successful notice and takedown, what information can you share with them to help them in their targeting?
Yeah, I'll start on this one. Honestly, the information is pretty limited. We need to comply with all applicable laws, including privacy laws. And I think Jason made a good point during his presentation. There are, and I should clarify as well. So when rights holders are approaching us saying we are referring a case to PSB and we're hoping for a criminal raid and prosecution, we're not sharing sales information, with that rights holder. They will work with PSB and the formal request will come from them, and we will provide that information to law enforcement. There is, as Jason said, a formal process within civil cases as well. And I really agree with that. Something I did not mention, but we, particularly within the AACA, we filed several dozen civil cases, often sometimes in coordination with rights holders. And that is really to put more pressure on the bad actors. And just so people know, we as Alibaba are not litigating the IP of another company. So the rights holder that we're working with, they are filing lawsuits to enforce our IP. Our claims are more like a breach of contract. Our terms of service are very clear that the sale of counterfeits is prohibited. And so if you, often a civil case can follow a criminal case. And if you have a criminal conviction, it should be a relatively straightforward matter to say, okay, there's been a finding that counterfeits were sold, and so that is a violation of our terms of service and tarnishes and harms our brand as well.
Thank you, Dan. And yes, I think in terms of information I shared earlier that through the brand registering dashboard, a brand owner has access to the status of their notices. They can see also the notices for the past 6 months. Once there is a successful notice of takedown, I believe that Amazon actually goes above the legal requirement sharing information with the brands. One of the things we began displaying also the U.S. sellers' business name and addresses on our Amazon seller profile page. While this was required of sellers in our store in countries like Europe, Mexico, and Japan, this was a voluntary expansion in the US, and we actually plan to expand and display seller contact information to all of our stores worldwide. We also partner closely with association. Brands Association, where we do offer participant insight into counterfeit threshold sales data of known infringer. So that might be very helpful for brands to leverage this information and decide where to focus their enforcement efforts. And also, we also partner with our CCU, our Counterfeit Crime Unit, to provide that information and collaborate with brands to pursue litigation and law enforcement referrals when that's in order to hold bad actors accountable.
Jason, I'd love to hear your thoughts on maximizing a targeting budget. So we've heard about what information is available. So Amazon will share seller information, address. How do you take that information that's publicly available, the information that will be shared by the platforms, and decide who you want to focus on when you're going through and even doing notice and takedown?
Yeah, I was going to add that it's hard to expect different platforms working together. I think it's up to the brand owner or their service providers to do the analysis on the information they were provided by those platforms. And then when they see those information, it's oftentimes that you will say one seller, they sell not only on one platform, but multiple platforms. And such targets will be your key targets for offline investigation. And very often when you find out the ID information of one seller and you cross-check on the other platforms, you will find out them on those platforms as well. For example, if you have an email address or a cell phone number and you check those email address or cell phone number on other platforms, very often you will find them on those platforms as well. Because most of the counterfeiters, they don't sell only on one platform, but multiple ones.
No, I think that makes sense. So if you're looking to target, you find one and then look to see if they're present on other platforms. So to kick it back to Dan and Anna one more time, when somebody finds a seller that's operating on multiple platforms, even if they haven't yet found counterfeit listings on your platform for that seller, how can they provide that information to you, sort of to have assistance looking for counterfeits, just sort of to improve the ability to target?
Well,
Go ahead, Deb.
oh, sorry, I didn't mean to jump in. I'm sorry. I do think, you know, if a rights holder is not finding any infringement or any counterfeits on our platform, I mean, I think it would be hard for them, frankly, to take action against a particular seller, even if they think it may be the same seller that they're reporting on another platform. You know, I think Jason, I think it was, had said earlier, you know, there's sort of an evolution or a little bit of cat and mouse. I would definitely encourage that some extra attention and time and detail is spent on that to see if, you know, maybe it's the same behavior that's being seen on another platform. It's just being disguised in a way that makes it more difficult to detect. I think that would be one suggestion. And I'm sort of sorry to go back, but can I go back and dovetail off of what Jason said just a moment ago?
Of course, please. This is supposed to be an exchange here.
Yeah, and you know, he said something that was, I thought, really insightful, and it triggered for me. So, you know, I mentioned the SME Advisory Committee, and you know, this is a committee of small and sometimes micro-sized or family-sized businesses. And these are all companies that have had to learn. They're all very smart. They're all very hardworking and very resourceful people. And they've really had to learn how to, you know, get results, you know, and without a big budget. And that every dollar really is their dollar in a way. So they're very thoughtful about how they may invest that in their business and try and make sure that they get a return on that. And, you know, we were having a conversation about kind of just like this, like, how do you focus? You know, what are your priorities? How do you decide where to spend your enforcement budget? And it was very interesting to me. You know, some of the SMEs had relatively expensive products to manufacture, and so there were relatively few infringers or counterfeiters that they were finding, and so they felt like an online enforcement effort could be very effective and could really harm their sales and drive them away. There were others who had very inexpensive products, and they were really focusing their budgets more on seizures, working with customs and particularly container seizures that may have a large volume of their products, and they felt like that was probably the most effective way for them to pursue counterfeits of their products. And then one of the most interesting comments was someone who has done business in China for a long time. His manufacturing has been in China for decades. And he often will take a business approach to things. If he is finding counterfeits, he will often call the manager of the factory that he's worked with, and he's developed these relationships, and they've done business together for a very long time. And sometimes he will pursue it on, his first call is to a business person to help try and see if they can help him understand, what's happening and how this is coming about. And so I guess to that extent, I would really encourage people thinking about how to have an effective budget is really even think about your products, like, what are they composed of? Where would be the most effective way to enforce it?
Thank you, Dave.
Anna, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Sure. I was just going back to like what Jason said about it, and also then it is hard to find, a seller, even if you have the information and determine whether a seller is active on another platform. But that's why, at Amazon, like we support a more robust information sharing. When it comes to pursuing bad actors, we don't see other platforms our competitor. We're talking about sharing information specific to bad actors, and so we will continue to expand initiative, to share this information amongst online marketplaces. We think that will be really important to expand everyone's visibility, allow us to alert maybe even one another and take action. So one of the examples that with the support and help of the National Intellectual Property Rights Coordination Center, the IPR Center, we worked with a small group of other online marketplaces to create a data exchange through a third-party vendor. So when we are sharing information about counterfeiters that we had each blocked previously from our store, and trying to understand what's the potential value of this data. So the results are encouraging, but obviously looking forward to continuing to work on this initiatives in 2022.
That's excellent. Thank you for touching on that. We're very happy to hear that platforms are talking to each other, sharing information. The IPR Center has done an excellent job in bringing various groups together. One of the shifts that rights holders, and we've been hearing from platforms as well, is the shift to live streaming, social commerce, advertising of goods, and then ghost listing on the platforms. Could you touch briefly on how big of a problem is this? Is it something that brand owners should be concerned with? And are there any solutions for ghost listings? And I'm going to open that up to anyone who wants to chime in first.
Yeah, maybe I should go first because I don't have an answer to your question, but it's a big problem. It's a big challenge for brand owners and for practitioners as well to identify counterfeiters on the streamlined platforms. There's no listings you can take down because they sell products, in 1 hour and then go away. So it's very difficult to secure evidence to go after them. To be honest, I don't have any good solution to a problem. It's a new problem. I think we need to work out a solution.
Yeah, I would add that we've certainly seen, some insight into this emerging risk, abuse by counterfeiter involving social media platforms specifically. You may be familiar with the case that the Counterfeit Crime Unit filed last year against this social influencer and the sellers. The social influencer and the sellers were working together to sell counterfeit in Amazon store. And they were promoting counterfeit products on forums like Instagram, TikTok. But the way they were doing it was quite brazen because they were posting this side-by-side photo of like a generic product, so non-branded, and then a luxury counterfeit product. And the text beneath said, order this, get this. And so the order this was obviously referring to the generic product that was falsely advertised on Amazon. And the get this refer to the counterfeit luxury product you will get once you bought the generic product. So, you know, by posting this generic product on our platform, they were trying to evade our protection. So they didn't, you know, there were nothing we could really pick up on to determine that was a luxury product. And, you know, there was a silver lining because the defendant social influencer had to explain that they had to resort to the use of the so-called hidden links in order to prevent Amazon from taking down the products and the orders being canceled. Well, while that gave us, you know, a little bit of a smile that our proactive tools are working, is definitely constitute a continued challenge, and because counterfeit remains a very serious business and problem.
And I guess I really agree with both Jason and Anna. You know, I think the points they made were very good. I would, you know, I think one thing that I would note is, you know, live streaming is not something that's new in terms of a way to offer a product. So you can have, so there are live streaming. It's just a very, I guess, a very traditional product listing, right? It's not on a third-party website. It's someone it can be an influencer who's just, you know, just showing a product, demoing the product, and, you know, those can just be reported. You know, if it turns out that someone is demoing a counterfeit product, that can be reported just like any other product. If it's a scenario where you know, there's a third-party site that is providing information, and like Anna said, you know, from our marketplace perspective, it looks very benign. You know, there's really nothing there to indicate that it's a problematic listing, but there's evidence that it is in fact a problematic listing elsewhere. That also can be reported. Just gather that information and make that a part of your takedown request because our teams won't even, you know, it won't make any sense. They'll think it's a mistake. You know, it's product A is listed and product B is what's being complained about. But if you can provide them with that information to help them understand why it is that actually product B is being offered, then they can accept that and remove the listing.
Thank you. And we are just about out of time. I want to point out that we had a bunch of great questions come in. We would ask that you send them to the askchinaip@uspto.gov email address. We'll make sure that they are passed along. So askchinaip@uspto.gov. Please send us those questions through email. There have been some requests for slides. If you want to request slides, please email us. We'll put you in touch with the presenters directly. And with that, thank you to our panelists. Very much appreciate this enlightening Q&A. And I'm going to pass it back over to Mike Mangelson for some closing remarks.
Thanks, David, and a special thanks to all of our expert guests that were with us, Anna, Dan, and Jason. And we appreciate all of the valuable insight that you provided to our audience today. I think everyone was, learned a lot from the presentations and your experience that you shared with us today. And I think it was also obvious as we talked through this discussion that this is only kind of part of the solution that we talked about today. And so it's very important for everybody to participate in the next event on December 2nd, when we're going to talk more about the offline, kind of actions and things that can be done. And maybe we'll get more pictures like Jason sent of raids happening. That's always fun to see those pictures. But I should also mention that on some of you sent in questions through the chat function. Unfortunately, we on this WebEx, once the program is over, those will disappear. So I think, well, David mentioned, make sure that you resend those questions if they weren't addressed in our discussion today. Make sure you send that to the Ask China IP at uspto.gov, because then we'll follow up with those questions. So again, appreciate for all of your everyone's participation today. I should also mention that we do quarterly updates on new legislation coming out of China, and some, highlight certain cases every quarter. We just held one in September, and let me see if I can Okay, December 16th is our next one. So we'll have our event on December 2nd, and then make sure you mark your calendars for December 16th, when we'll have our quarterly update and talk about some of the new legislation and things that are coming out of China. So again, thank you everyone for your participation. Thanks to our guests, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank
It was
you.
a pleasure. Thanks very much for the opportunity.